This is just a sample of the audiobook. To get the complete audiobook, access the link posted in the first comment.
Every morning, they fill out play plans, forms on which they write or draw descriptions of that day's play. I am going to drive the train. I'm going to take the dollies to the beach. And they spend long hours engaged in mature dramatic play, extended, complex make-believe scenarios that the designers of Tools of the Mind believe naturally teach children how to follow rules and regulate impulses. As I watched the kids in room 140, I found myself thinking inevitably about Ellington, the tiny life form cooing and burping and wailing away 30 miles to the north in our studio apartment in Manhattan. I knew I wanted him to have a happy, successful life, but I didn't really know what exactly I meant by that, or just what my wife and I were supposed to be doing to help guide him there. I wasn't alone in my confusion. Ellington was born into a particularly anxious moment in the history of American parenting, and that anxiety had grown especially keen in cities like New York, where the competition over slots in favored preschools verged on the gladiatorial. A pair of economists from the University of California recently dubbed this nationwide contest for early academic achievement the Rug Rat Race, and each year the race seems to be starting earlier and growing more intense. 2 years before Ellington's birth, the Kumon chain of tutoring centers opened New York City's first junior Kumon franchise, where children as young as 2 spent their mornings filling out worksheets and completing drills on letter and number recognition. Age 3 is the sweet spot, Kumon's chief financial officer told a reporter for the New York Times. But if they're out of a diaper and can sit still with a Kumon instructor for 15 minutes, we will take them. Ellington would be growing up in a culture saturated with an idea you might call the cognitive hypothesis, the belief, rarely expressed aloud but commonly held nonetheless, that success today depends primarily on cognitive skills, the kind of intelligence that gets measured on IQ tests, including the abilities to recognize letters and words, to calculate, to detect patterns, and that the best way to develop these skills is to practice them as much as possible, beginning as early as possible. The cognitive hypothesis has become so universally accepted that it is easy to forget that it is actually a relatively new invention. You can trace its contemporary rise, in fact, to 1994, when the Carnegie Corporation published Starting Points, Meeting the Needs of Our Youngest Children, a report that sounded an alarm about the cognitive development of our nation's children. The problem, according to the report, was that children were no longer receiving enough cognitive stimulation in the first 3 years of life, in part because of the increasing number of single-parent families and working mothers, and so they were arriving in kindergarten unready to learn. The report launched an entire industry of brain-building 0 to 3 products for worried parents. Billions of dollars worth of books and activity gyms and baby Einstein videos and DVDs were sold. The Carnegie findings and the studies that followed in their wake had a powerful effect on public policy, too, as legislators and philanthropists concluded that disadvantaged children were falling behind early on because of insufficient cognitive training. Psychologists and sociologists produced evidence linking the academic underperformance of poor children to a lack of verbal and mathematical stimulation at home and at school. One of the most famous of these studies, which I wrote about in my first book, Whatever It Takes, was conducted by Betty Hart and Todd R. Risley, 2 child psychologists who, beginning in the 1980s, intensively studied a group of 42 children from professional, working class, and welfare families in Kansas City. Hart and Risley found that the crucial difference in the children's upbringings and the reason for the divergence in their later outcomes boiled down to one thing: the number of words that the children heard from their parents early in life. By age 3, Hart and Risley determined, the children raised by professional parents had heard 30 million words spoken to them. The children with parents on welfare had heard just 10 million. That shortfall, they concluded, was at the root of the poorer kids' later failures in school and in life. There is something undeniably compelling about the cognitive hypothesis. The world it describes is so neat, so reassuringly linear, such a clear case of inputs here